Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. Sushi has become the go-to food of choice for many Americans today. But how much do we really know about what is in the sushi we eat? WRAL Investigates purchased a variety of sushi in the Triangle and had scientists test it to see what we're really eating when we ingest America's favorite meal. Senior producer Randall Kerr joins us in this episode with what they found. Randall, welcome to the program.
Thank you much.
So this is a really interesting experiment. You got a bunch of takeout. Walk me through how this sushi was divided for the testing and what you were looking for.
Sure. So we went a variety of places. We went, from, grocery store sushi, which a lot of people eat, to high-end restaurant sushi and everywhere in between. And we tried to get 3 or 4 different types of fish from every place that we went. I brought it home. A professor at UNC delivered a bunch of vials to me. They need a pea-sized piece of fish. Cut off a pea-sized piece, stick it in a vial, number it, wrote down where we got it, what it's supposed to be according to the menu, and then we froze every sample until we had all of the samples we needed because we bought this over, a couple of days. We washed hands in between each piece of fish. We washed cutting utensils in between each. Forceps we washed every time to make sure there was no cross-contamination. Froze those samples, finally had a meetup point when this professor and his class had the ability to test this fish, and delivered him a bag of frozen fish pieces to take to his class.
So you were kind of like the scientist assistant in this experiment.
Yeah, at the most basic level.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to explain what you were looking for is basically to see if the fish they are labeling it is really what it is. In other words, is it what I've ordered or is it something else?
Sure. And this goes back to, a few years ago, we did a similar type story where we weren't focused on the type of fish, but we were focused on where your fish is from, because you can actually get out of DNA, you can get that information as well. So we went to a bunch of local seafood restaurants who touted local seafood fresh from the coast, and we had it tested and found out
it was not
local.
Boy,
it sure wasn't.
Sure.
So this took us to the sushi aspect of it to make sure that what the fish is on the menu is what you're getting when you put it in your mouth. And so they extract the DNA from these fish samples, send them off to have them amplified, and they actually, the government has a DNA database of every type of fish species in the world.
Which is amazing because I think of DNA, when you're solving a murder case. But
right.
This is a different type of uses for DNA.
Yep. And they amplify that DNA. They send the amplified DNA back to the class and to the professor. And you can throw in this huge, it's like pages and pages of DNA. You can throw it into this database in a process called blasting, and it'll search the database and find a match and pop up. This is fish A, B, or C, and then you know if that's what it was supposed to be.
Wow. Okay, we're going to talk more about the class and the professor and what they did after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. So you did this with UNC Chapel Hill biology professor John Bruno. What does he say about how common it is to have fish and specifically sushi mislabeled?
So it's gotten a lot better over the past few years, and in his estimation, based on the research that he's done and research that he has researched, usually about 75 to 80% of sushi is technically labeled correctly. One of the problems, aside from something being completely mislabeled, which is obviously a problem, but the other issue that he raises is what he calls soft mislabeling. Okay? So if you go to the butcher and say, I want meat. Well, they could give you beef, they could give you chicken, it could be ground, it could be filet mignon. It's just meat.
It's a generic term.
So when you go to a sushi restaurant and the menu just says
fish.
Tuna,
right.
or it says tuna,
okay.
Well, there are lots of different types of tuna.
You just don't know what kind it is.
So you're going to get that tested. Tuna is one of those that's usually labeled correctly, except for high-end bluefin tuna, which is often mislabeled because it's expensive.
Right.
But tuna in general and salmon are labeled correctly, but the menus aren't very specific. It is just tuna.
So it's a broad category of tuna.
There are lots of different types of tuna, and some of them can have high levels of mercury, but there's no differentiation on menus when it comes to that. So he calls that soft mislabeling. So it's not technically wrong, but it's not technically right either.
It's not specific, so it's a little bit misleading.
Yep.
So you did all this testing. Tell me what you found out about the labeling of sushi.
So we took in more than 3 dozen samples. Some of them are still being amplified right now, so we don't have all the results. And so far, our sushi has been labeled correctly, aside from the soft mislabeling, except we did have one sample that the initial test came back. It was supposed to be white tuna. Clearly, it said white tuna on the menu, and it had the Japanese term for white tuna on the menu. And the initial test, and we are retesting it because it seemed so odd, but it could be true, the initial test came back as scalloped hammerhead shark.
Ah.
So not only is scalloped hammerhead shark very high in some contaminants, but it's also endangered. That would be a problem.
Can't be eating that, no. So what is the downside to the customer when you're talking about sushi being mislabeled? You've already mentioned the mercury, so you obviously don't want something contaminated. But is there a quality issue?
Well, I'm sure there's sushi connoisseurs who would say absolutely it makes a difference what you're eating. But to me, it's no different than, you want to get what you pay for. Whether it's the highest end sushi or the lowest end sushi, that's what you chose to eat, and that's what you should get. If you order a hamburger from a restaurant, you expect it to be hamburger. So it's just a fact of looking out for the consumers to make sure that you're getting what you pay for, getting your money's worth, and like you mentioned, making sure it's safe.
Right, absolutely. What is the answer to the mislabeling issue? Obviously, if you ask a waiter in a restaurant, they're probably not going to know if you say, well, are you sure this is such and such? How do we get around this?
Well, for starters, John Bruno, the professor, has been pushing for this, is some sort of program that just tests things for mislabeling, tests seafood. It's not going to solve everything. It's not going to catch everything, but at least it's a start. Now, the problem, with sushi is if something is mislabeled that you buy at the restaurant, whose fault is it? Is the restaurant tricking you by switching flounder with tilapia? Is the distributor overcharging the restaurant by switching tilapia with flounder?
Or is the person who's making the menu taking liberties?
Or is it the person catching the fish that's saying, hey, look, I caught all this fresh flounder, it's tilapia. Like red snapper is one of the most mislabeled fish, whether it's in sushi or just a restaurant dish. It almost is never red snapper, but it's on a lot of menus.
So people just need to be really astute when they are ordering food, eating at a restaurant, about maybe asking more questions about what something is.
Sure. If I would just say, if you're really, really serious about your sushi and you want to make sure that what you're getting, obviously just like anything else, if you go to a nicer place, there's probably a better chance that it's going to be accurate.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more of what you guys find in your experiment. This has been the WRAL Daily Download, a production of WRAL News. Check out my new true crime podcast from WRAL Studios. The Killing Month, August 1978, details the investigation into the serial murders carried out by a band of outlaw brothers in Pennsylvania. Episodes 1 through 7 are available now. Find the show wherever you get your podcasts.